Homage to the Triple Gem. So everybody in the world and all beings in the world are actually united by a single aim. Sometimes we think that people are very different, and they are in their characters. Sometimes they are in the way that they live their life, but their aims are all the same. And not just people, all beings, kind of cockroaches and ants, mosquitoes, they all have the same aim, which is that they want to be happy and they don't want to suffer. When we come into the world, if we don't receive instructions, then we're called an uninstructed worldling. If we haven't, person hasn't attained the first of the noble attainments, or an uninstructed worldling. And when a person is an uninstructed worldling, what they automatically tend to think is happiness, is whatever they can get in terms of a pleasant sensation through the tongue or the eyes or the ears, something with the body, something outside, something with their senses that they can enjoy. And it's natural. It's not hard to prove that. Kind of little kids know it when they have candy at the store. Little kids know it when they have ice cream. It tastes good. It's very easy to jump to the conclusion that what happiness is sensual pleasures. So I remember when I was actually a young man, I had a girlfriend. I went to visit her parents for the first time, and they asked what my religion was, and they were Christians. And I said I was a Buddhist, and they said, "What's the goal of Buddhism?" And I said, "It's to be happy." They're like, "To be happy? You can get happiness by turning on the TV." So, of course, that's not necessarily wrong, but what kids tend to realize as they grow older is that there's a cost to that type of happiness. It's not free. So, one of the costs of that type of happiness is that often it has this upfront pleasure and then down the line pain. You eat a lot of ice cream, sure, that tastes good right away. Any kid can know that. But what little kids don't know is that if you eat a lot of ice cream and you don't stop, you get diabetes. What they don't understand fully when they're eating it, often, depending on their age, is that if you eat too much ice cream, you get fat, and that has various negative consequences. So sensual pleasures can be like this. They have this upfront, very overwhelming aspect to them, but down the line pain. And so long as a person is not instructed, all that they know is sensual pleasure. So people in the world, oftentimes when you look at what it is that people care about, what they tend to care about is actually, once they've got enough for their basic needs, they care a lot about status. That tends to be where their desires go. And I've said this in other videos. When you think about the difference between like a Toyota and a Mercedes-Benz on a highway in in North America, or maybe not the Autobahn in Germany, but other places where they have a speed limit on the highway, there's not a big difference between those cars. I mean, one might have a leather seat, another one has a polyester kind of fuzzy seat, but really, the difference is not huge in terms of what you're able to do with the car and the general level of comfort you're getting. And we're not talking about the difference between somebody with a house or without a house here. Difference between a leather seat and a slightly plush polyester one, and the difference between maybe a slightly ricketier ride, and the difference between maybe a little bit different console, and these kind of things. So what it is that people actually desire from this car, from these things that are luxury items, is sometimes not as much their luxury. It's what they convey about a person's image, and then the way that other people treat them because of what that conveys about their image. So if you have a Mercedes-Benz logo on your car, then other people will treat you differently. They'll treat you differently when you get at the gas station. They'll treat you differently when you pull up at a party. They'll treat you differently where you go. And it's because that is actually a symbol of status. It's a symbol of wealth. And it's a symbol of how much sensual pleasures you can access. So actually status in human society tends to gravitate on these lines because generally people are uninstructed. And even if they have religions, which every society does, then the larger number of people, are not, they may be interested, but not interested to the degree where it shapes every facet of their life in a profound way. It's just a normal thing. So the Buddha has a simile. He says, "What do you think, monks, is more the dirt under my finger?" He takes some dirt under his finger, or the great earth? And the monks say, "Well, of course, the dirt under the great earth is more. The dirt on your finger doesn't even count." He says, in the same way, the number of people who after death go to heaven, go to the human realm are few. Far more go to the realm of animals, the realm of hungry ghosts, into hell. So the number of people who are interested in actually training their mind can actually be relatively few. And the allure of sensual pleasures, not just through the immediate effects that they give, but through the story that people build around them, can be quite intense. The story that they build about which gets reinforced by the way that other people talk about them, by the way that other people treat them. The trouble with this is that sensual pleasures actually don't give that much pleasure. Things that are outside of us, that we can enjoy with our eyes, with our ears, with nose, with the other senses, those things have quite a lot of drawbacks to them. So the Buddha compares it to a burning grass torch. He compares it to a pit of coals, and compares it to a well-scraped bone that you throw to a dog. And what happens when you have a burning grass torch? You think it's a good thing, and you go into the wind and it burns you. Wind blows it back and it burns you. Or you throw a well-scraped bone to a dog, and the dog chews on the bone. All that it gets is the taste of its saliva. So one of the things with sensual pleasures is that actually the perceptions that we build about how pleasant they are often occur either in the future, or often occur looking backwards at that sensual pleasure and evaluating how it was through memory, not as it actually is in the moment. So I often say that you can do an experiment, and next time you're really craving some food, go and bite into it and see how tasty it is, and see what you can actually gain from the actual pleasure of it. Actually, what the taste buds register, kind of salty, sweet, greasy, doesn't really register like this overwhelming sensual rush. So what the mind generally tends to crave is actually the sensual rush that allows it to escape, that allows it to blank out for a little bit. And this is why people are very poor judges of what it is that makes them happy, what it is that doesn't make them happy. So psychologists have found that. People are generally not good judges of what it is that will actually make them happy. What they think will make them happy often doesn't, apparently according to psychologists. So when a person receives instruction, when they start to try to move away from the state of an uninstructed worldling, knowing that their goal is happiness, they look for a solution to this goal. So in the canon, it's often described as something like, surely there's somebody who knows a way out of this whole massive suffering. I remember when I was a young kid, I was there in elementary school, and the teacher asked us, what do you think the purpose of life is? And I put my hand up, and I said, I think it's to be happy. That's the purpose of life. And I was totally convinced of this. She said, no, that's not right. But I was completely convinced. And went around living my life actually for a long period after that, trying to find the answer to that question. So what we have when we look for the answer to that question is actually a solution that the Buddha's given us in the Four Noble Truths. He gives us a solution for what suffering is, for what its cause is, what its cessation is, and how to bring it to an end. So when a person searches for the solution and they find it in the teachings of the Buddha, then they start to move from the stage of an uninstructed worldling to somebody who's becoming instructed. In other words, now you have somebody who's pointed you away to happiness. So the Buddha instructs us. He says, there's certain types of happiness that when you consume them, they'll give happiness right now, but down the line, they'll give you pain. So give up the things that will give you happiness right now, and pain down the line, and cultivate the things that may be painful now, but will give happiness down the line. And in doing so, you start to recognize the patterns that underlie happiness. There's a lot that goes into the patterns that underlie happiness, especially with sensuality, sensual pleasures. One of the principles that underlies this is that it actually depends on its opposite. So, people who have been working all week, looking forward to the weekend is just this amazing thing. But take somebody who's retired, now has all this free times on their hands, and sometimes just staying at home can be torturous. I stayed in touch with my third grade teacher until he passed away actually this year. And sometimes he would tell me, a little bit about what it's like, kind of just being retired, being really, really old, and hard to leave your house, and you're just stuck there in the house. And you can get lonely. It's kind of not so much to do. Get a little bit stir crazy just being stuck there in the house. There's this abundance of free time. This kind of lack of contrast makes the happiness that you can get from the freedom of not working grow less the more of it that you have. And so this is built into sensual pleasures, this kind of trap, that the more of something that you desire, the more you desire something, the more of it that you get, the less pleasurable it is. So what this means is that so long as somebody's searching outside for happiness, then they're always going to be running from point A to point B to point C. And this is why the Buddha says that the cause of suffering is craving, kind of running here and there, essentially seeking ever fresh delight. So this is one of the causal factors that underlies this particular type of happiness. There's other types of happiness, though, that when a person starts to practice meditation, they can turn their mind to the breath, turn their mind to any topic. Then they can realize that when a person is virtuous, when they're generous, when they're able to focus on one thing in and of itself, then they can feel as if they have the happiness that they need. And as their mind becomes still, as they become more wholesome in their thoughts, in their deeds, in their words, then this is the type of happiness that can grow. But this is a type of happiness that that starts painful and then grows larger the further down the line that one goes. So the Buddha teaches us to recognize this type of happiness and to cultivate the happiness that comes from generosity, to cultivate the happiness that comes from virtue, and to cultivate the happiness that comes from concentration, from practicing meditation. This type of happiness is far more stable. It doesn't depend on other people to validate whether the hood ornament on the car is really something that's an indication of status, really something that's an indication of wealth. All it requires is actually our own ability to do the things that are necessary to keep generating this happiness. So what underlies this type of happiness, one of the causal principles that underlies this, is that it has to be generated. So I was doing a video recently on the importance of mindfulness and kind of what the Buddhist teachings on mindfulness are. It's very intense, the way that he describes to apply mindfulness. You know, at its highest levels, of course, one's going to work up to that. It gives the simile of a beauty queen, courtesan, dancing in the street, and a huge crowd gathers around her, and a person puts a bowl of oil on their head, and behind them comes a man with a sword. And the man says, if even a drop of this bowl of oil spills, then I'll cut your head off right there. So the Buddha says, well, what do you think, bhikkhus? Would that man let his awareness go outside of the bowl of oil? Well, no, Lord. In the same way, you should cultivate mindfulness directed towards the body. So there is quite a lot of work in doing this, actually. Keeping precepts is work. You kind of want to do something, want to drink, want to steal, want to lie, and you can't. That's work. You want to be generous, you want to give something away that you could have spent on ice cream, could have spent on a movie. It's work, it's hard work. And you want to bring your mind to the present moment, which is one of the applications of mindfulness. It's hard work. The mind wants to run here and there, wants to run off. But this hard work has a reward, which is the happiness that comes from being blameless, the happiness that comes from being generous, and the happiness that comes from concentration. And this is still a higher type of happiness. However, because it requires work, it's not a happiness that's permanent. And it has this drawback that it always requires inputs. So when you go out to enjoy it, it disappears. And this is also a principle that underlies almost any type of happiness you can get in samsara. When you go out to enjoy its fruits, the fruits of your good karma, the fruits of your labor, when you're enjoying it, you're not generating it. And as a result, it disappears. So you can think of somebody who works all week to get a good paycheck. And then after getting the good paycheck, they go out and spend it. Well, then the money's gone. And they have to go and get another paycheck again. So this is a drawback that is involved in all types of happiness in samsara. So the Buddha instructs us further that it's not just enough to have the happiness of sensuality, which has many drawbacks. It's not just enough to have the happiness of concentration. But a person should develop happiness that essentially is based on the cutting of attachment to things. And this is a happiness that comes through dispassion. So when early missionaries first heard about Buddhism, they thought it was very pessimistic. They're always talking about suffering. And when you talk about the higher levels of happiness that depend on dispassion, that doesn't sound very happy. Kind of get dispassionate for something, then how is it that that's going to lead to happiness? I remember I was walking around on the street in Pickering one time, and sometimes people would stop you in the West and ask you what you're doing, what kind of, what Buddhism's about. And so I told him about what the goal was, and he's like, well, I don't like that. Sounds like just nothingness. Sounds like just emptiness. Doesn't sound very happy. But our ability to conceive of types of happiness is based on the experiences that we have. So until a person has happiness that comes from directing their mind to a single object, from concentration, they have no idea what it's like. It doesn't map in the same way that sensual pleasures do. So it sounds like something really difficult, like something really unpleasant. And until a person works hard to try to develop this passion for the things that cause them to suffer, then it sounds like something really horrible. It sounds like something really frightening. What do you mean, dispassion? So the faculty that actually allows a person to find happinesses that are much more stable, that don't depend on sensuality, that don't depend on generating the happiness, is this faculty of discernment, this faculty of wisdom that actually looks at what it is that's causing one to be happy and what it is that's causing one to suffer. One of the real paradoxes about the world, about samsara, is that when a person traces back the things that cause them to suffer, it's almost always linked to something that used to make them happy, or that has made them happy, or that is making them happy. And this is one of the things that the mind tries to hide from itself, that gets buried under the layers of the mind when a person indulges in sensuality and the mind just runs off somewhere else. Don't see the consequences of the happiness that you're getting. Don't see that its loss is inevitable and that that will lead to suffering. So when a person examines this over and over again, they become dispassionate to the things that they had passion for. And as a result, whatever it is that causes those things to change does not affect them, so long as they've completely developed dispassion towards it, so long as they've mentally let it go. There's this sutta called the Chiravasti Sutta. And in that sutta, there's a headman, and he has a wife named Chiravasti. And the Buddha gives him a teaching and says that craving, or that clinging, craving essentially, paraphrasing here, is the root of suffering. And he says, he basically says, I'll give you an example, headman. He said, what do you think, before you met Chiravasti, if change and alteration were to take place in her, would you suffer because of it? He says, no, I wouldn't have suffered. He says, what about now? He says, well, of course I would suffer now. A change in Chiravasti would mean a change in my life. And the Buddha says it's because of your desire and passion for Chiravasti that you'll suffer when things change for her. If she grows old, if she grows sick, if she dies, if she grows separate. All of these things are just words for a person, so long as they don't investigate them in their own experience, so long as they don't work to break the addictions that underlie these things. But if a person works to break these addictions and they develop this dispassion, then it'll be much more than words. And one can imagine some of these kind of processes almost like somebody who becomes suspicious, somebody who's in love with their wife, and then a good friend comes and tells them, look, your wife is cheating on you. So they hire a private detective, and the private detective goes and follows the wife around and follows them different places. And, certain signs start to appear. Oh, what's going on? You said that you were at the kids' PTA meeting, but I asked John's wife and she was there and she said you weren't there. Oh, yeah, you may come up with some excuse. So you get suspicious. But still, you love your wife so much, or, you can flip it and say your husband so much that it's hard to let go of that person. So one continues to investigate and, find some strange things happening, and one maybe finds that members of the opposite sex, a man is calling the house and then hanging up in kind of unusual numbers. So one's suspicions grow. But finally, it's when the detective says, look, go to this hotel, your wife's in there. And one goes to the hotel, opens the door, and then sees for themselves what their wife has been up to. That's when they really know. That's when there's no doubt about the matter, and that's when their love or their passion or their delight in their wife cannot hide the truth of what has been happening. And we thought that all this time she was, she belonged to one. Thought all this time that she was a friend. But yet all this time she did not belong to one. All this time she was not a friend, she was an enemy. And what we thought all this time she was going to give happiness, actually she was laying the foundations for suffering. So the things that a person delights in their life are like this. And the good friend that we have is the Buddha. And he teaches us, look at where your suffering is coming from. Don't be afraid to look at it. Look and see where it's coming from. Look and see, and you'll find eventually that it links to something that you delight in. So when a person finally catches their wife and sees for themselves, what sets in is dispassion. What can set in is disgust and terror. You kind of wouldn't even want to be in the same room as them, let alone, you can't ever let go of them and, be together with them. It's kind of, this person is no longer mine. And kind of they're a danger. They're not happiness, they're suffering. And because of that dispassion, when that person and their wife, let's just leave all the potential intricacies of divorce aside, everything else being equal, when that person and their wife separate, what happens to their wife, ex-wife after that, does not cause them suffering in the same way because of the relinquishment of their passion. So if one relinquishes attachment and passion in a small way, as Ajahn Chah says, essentially one gets a little bit of peace. If one relinquishes it in a big way, then one gets big peace. If one relinquishes passion and delight fully, then one gets full peace, complete peace, total peace. And this is the aim of the Buddha's teachings. And it can all start with this investigation and with this knowledge that what unites all beings is their quest for happiness. Might have different bodies, people might have different occupations, might have different species, but everybody, all beings, everywhere, are looking for happiness. It's just a matter of whether or not they find the instructions that actually lead them to where it really is.